A biting December wind swept across a temporary airfield near Reims, France, cutting through the worn wool of German uniforms. Men who had once marched with pride now stood hunched and hollow. The war had drained them, pushed them past hunger, exhaustion, and finally into surrender. A long line of prisoners waited under the watchful eyes of American guards. Some limped, some had lost legs. Bandages were already stained, journeys already etched into their bodies. The Americans did not shout, did not gloat, did not even speak much. They simply guided the men toward a waiting transport plane, as if ushering travelers rather than remnants of an enemy army. The silence was heavier than any threat. Among the prisoners was 19-year-old Henrik Miller. He had lost his leg outside the Ardennes and now leaned on a crude wooden crutch, carved by a medic with a pocket knife. Each step jolted pain through his side. He had not wept when his leg was taken. He had not wept when his unit was overrun. But here, standing in the open airfield, uncertainty caught his breath. Nearby, an older man, once a tank mechanic, rubbed a small tin medal in his hands. It had once symbolized pride. Now it meant nothing. The Americans had collected weapons but left medals untouched. They seemed to understand pride differently, quieter, less theatrical. The older man did not know if that was more respectful or cruel. The plane waited. Rumors said some prisoners would be sent across the Atlantic to the United States. It sounded impossible. Americans, the propaganda had warned, were barbaric. But here they were, treating the wounded humanely, feeding them, tending their injuries. Confusion, Henrik realized, was dangerous, but unavoidable. A slip on the frozen ground brought Henrik face to face with kindness. One American guard instinctively steadied him, a simple touch, no words. Henrik stared. The guard nodded and returned to his post. That moment, brief, ordinary, felt like recognition. Inside, the men moved slowly, the plane smelling of oil and canvas. Stretchers were secured. Medics checked bandages daily. No beatings, no starvation. The Americans valued order, procedure, routine. Henrik watched the dust float in the stale air. Nothing in his training had prepared him for an enemy who treated him like a human being. Arrival in the American South. Thick humidity, pine-scented air. The hospital was not grand, but it was orderly. Clean beds, wide windows, fresh paint. Wounded Germans were placed alongside wounded Americans. Pain recognized pain, and it rarely fought its reflection. Henrik's bed was spotless. Nurses worked without pity, speaking quietly of infection risk, muscle condition, and recovery. For the first time since his injury, Henrik was treated not as a soldier, but as a patient. Days passed. Fevers broke. Wounds healed. The war still raged in Europe, but here, in the strange safety, life moved differently. And then one morning, a surgeon rolled out a blueprint of a prosthetic leg. "This is for you. You will walk again." Hope hit Henrik like a stone in water. Terrifying, fragile, yet real. Prosthetic workshop. Sunlight streaming through tall windows. Henrik leaned on his crutch as technicians measured his stump, shaping a prosthetic leg. The smell of wood shavings and machine oil filled the air, warm, earthy, and alive. Carl, the older mechanic, still held his medal, unsure if he could accept this new reality. The first fitting was awkward. The prosthetic felt alien. Henrik gripped the parallel bars, took one step, then another. He wobbled. He adjusted. By the third step, it felt less like falling and more like learning. Carl's breath caught. Recognition, not envy. The future was not closed. Amputees learning balance, some crying in frustration, others laughing. Technicians guiding without coddling, each step earned. Carl eventually allowing himself a prosthetic, slowly regaining movement. Henrik walked full length of the workshop without crutch, greeted by quiet, warm silence. Small gestures bridged the gap between captor and captive, a shared cigarette, a corrected strap, a nod of acknowledgement. Hate fades in proximity. The war neared its end. Letters arrived from home. Some brought news of destruction, some silence. Yet life went on. Meals were regular, routines became familiar, movement became possible. The quiet work of healing restored choice, something the war had taken. Henrik and Carl eventually returned to Germany. Cities were scarred, neighborhoods erased, but the ability to walk, steady, earned, remained. Henrik worked as a carpenter, Carl as a mechanic. They did not speak often of the war. When they did, it was not about battles, but about moments of being seen, steadied, helped. Each step they took was proof of survival, resilience, and humanity. Compassion in war does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It survives quietly, in movement, in labor, in the simple continuation of life. Henrik and Carl never received medals for the steps they took, yet those steps carried them forward, into a future they thought had been lost. Small gestures, patience, and quiet skill rebuilt more than limbs. They restored hope. And that, in its own way, can change everything. Thanks for watching. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for the next story.